Today I am going to be answering a lot of questions that I have gotten since I had this last baby, all about baby, whether it's home birth or breastfeeding, pregnancy, all things baby. As I am recording this, baby is 1 month old. 1 month old today. So for the past month, I have laid pretty low. I put out a couple videos just to share my birth story and kind of getting back into the swing of things, but I haven't done a lot. And I have seen so many of your questions come up as comments on my videos, and I've wanted to answer them all, but it takes a lot of time to answer a lot of these questions. So I decided to do a Q&A video. That's what we're doing today. We're just going to do Q&A all about babies, birth, pregnancy, fertility, infancy, just all kinds of stuff like that. So if that's not what you're into, I totally get it. We will actually be back to homesteading next week, and there's so much going on right now. We have a new cow here on the farm. I'm not sure if it's going to work out, but I'll tell you about that next week. We've got a lot going on in the garden, just a lot going on. But for today, it's all about babies. So I did a question box on Instagram and then kind of scanned through the comments on my last few videos and just made a list of the most asked questions, and I'm going to answer those today. So I'm going to start out by answering the question about how my family and friends received my decision to have an unassisted home birth, or just to have a home birth. A lot of you asked about that. Maybe you have family and friends who are just skeptical, reluctant, suspicious of you choosing to have your baby at home. And, you know, that really, I think that's one of those things that you don't owe anyone an answer. As long as you're on the same page with your husband, that's really all that matters. So if somebody wants to know more about your decision, then great, answer their questions, talk to them about it. But if they're just grilling you, they're interrogating you, or they're giving you trouble, don't even have the conversation. You're an adult. So it's as simple as that. You can just say, you know what, thank you so much. It's clear that you care about me and care about the baby, and I'm grateful for that, but this is not up for conversation. We're going to keep our healthcare decisions private for ourselves and for the baby moving forward. So this isn't something that we're going to talk about from now on, but I'd love to talk about something else. So you can just smile, leave it at that. And if they don't respect that, that probably signals that there are deeper problems with that relationship. You know what I mean? People who just don't respect your boundaries when you put them out there. So I'm not going to go into that, but that's all I would do if somebody gave you problems. As far as my friends and family, I have not gotten any pushback, but I don't know. I've been a mom for a long time, and it's been like a slow progression of becoming more just not doing things mainstream. So my friends and family know how I am. Nothing I do surprises them at this point. And they also know that they're just not going to win an argument with me if it comes down to statistics, facts, and research. So there's just that. And that's, if you do want to engage with people, you need to be prepared to do so in a calm manner. So you don't ever want to damage your relationships on your end. If somebody else damages a relationship because of how they're acting, you can't help that. But on your end, just stay calm, smile, be nice, set boundaries if you need to, and that is that. Next question is, what would I have done if there was a shoulder dystocia? So what if, hi baby, you want me to look at you, talk to you, don't you? Yes, you do. He's starting to really smile and kind of coo at me and talk to me, and he wants me to look at him and not the camera. But what would I have done if baby's shoulders got stuck during birth? It just wasn't something I was worried about, because shoulder dystocia is a lot more about positioning of the baby and restricted movement in the mother as opposed to size. People think that it's about having a big baby. Like if you have a big baby, then you're more likely to have a shoulder dystocia. That's just not true. The evidence is not there to support that. So if the baby is, unable to flex the chin when, engaging, or just, there are different things positionally with the baby that could lead to a shoulder dystocia, but that can all be identified before you have the baby by palpation. And remember, we talked about what palpation is. That's just feeling the body to diagnose something or identify something. So you can feel your belly, feel the baby's position, and predict pretty accurately whether or not shoulder dystocia might happen. If you're not confident doing this yourself, then have a midwife do it. Midwives should be good at that. So that's one thing. Another thing is restricted movement in the mother. So it's unnatural to tell a woman what to do when she's giving birth. A woman, it's just instinctual, right? Like, it's like when you're going to the bathroom, when you're having a bowel movement, you don't need to be coached through that. You need to be left alone and given privacy. It's the same with birth. Now, you might be the type of woman who likes encouragement and suggestions. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you are truly able to tune in to what your body's telling you to do, then you'll know how to move your body in such a way that the baby shouldn't get stuck, unless there was a positioning issue that wasn't identified or something like that, or unless you have an anatomical issue. So it's very, very rare, like very rare, that a modern American woman would have a pelvis that doesn't allow her to birth vaginally. That's just very rare. So if there's no other issue, and your movement's not restricted, you're able to listen to your body and move how you need to move, it's just not an issue. But if it is an issue, then you can always just, you'll have to manipulate the baby with your hand. So that can be done. And you can do it yourself, or your midwife can do it. Midwives are actually really, really great at this. If the baby is stuck, then the midwife actually does have to reach in and reposition the baby a little bit, and it's just fine. All right, the next question I got is, would I recommend a home birth or an unassisted birth for a first-time mom? I would definitely recommend a home birth for a first-time mom. Absolutely. It's a common misconception, like, oh, I'll go to the hospital for my first baby just to make sure everything's okay, and then if everything goes okay, then I'll have the rest of my babies at home. That is such a terrible idea. You are setting yourself up for failure, because the C-section rate in this country is 1 in 3. It's 33% on average, just by walking into the hospital doors as a patient. Now, you might say, well, my OB is really natural and is going to support me for a vaginal delivery. Well, your OB might not be on call when you go into labor, and you have no idea what kind of nurses you're going to get. You have no control when you show up at that hospital. Absolutely no control, unless you schedule an induction, and then you're setting yourself up for a higher risk for C-section as well, because you're being induced, right? So it's a horrible idea. If you think that you want home births, do it from the get-go with your very first one. Otherwise, you're putting yourself at risk for having to go the VBAC route, which VBAC is vaginal birth after cesarean. It can totally be done. I know a lot of ladies who have had successful VBACs at home or in the hospital after many C-sections. I talked to ladies who have had VBACs after 5 or 6 C-sections. It can be done. The risk does go up a little bit, but it's actually riskier to continue having C-sections than to try for VBAC. Anyway, you're setting yourself up for complications if you go the hospital route. So go the home birth route from day one. The best research we have shows that home birth is just as safe as hospital birth for the baby, and safer for the mother. And that's just looking at like likelihood of death, like mortality rate. That's not looking at overall satisfaction, because it's a lot of ladies go into the hospital, and yes, like they come home with a baby who is alive and they're alive, but the mother is traumatized. And that can happen at home too. Like, you can have a traumatizing home birth. It's just a lot less likely. So start out at home if you want to go the home birth route. As far as like, do I think that a first-time mom should have an unassisted home birth with her first baby? I can't make that decision for anyone. It's really going to depend on the woman. You know yourself. Are you the type that does this kind of thing? Do you do things on your own and take ownership for things and make things happen regularly? You're probably like kind of a type A. I don't necessarily want to say a stubborn person, but you just very, perseverant person. If you've got that type of personality and you're knowledgeable and comfortable with birth, then you might make that decision and feel comfortable with it. But if you're not comfortable with it, don't make that decision. That's what midwives are for, is so you don't have to worry about it. So that is my answer to that question. I got a lot of questions about just recommendations for resources on home birth and unassisted birth. I do have a book list, so I'll link that in the description for you guys. One of my favorite books, it's called Home Birth on Your Own Terms. It is geared more toward unassisted birth, but it's great even if you're going to have a midwife. And honestly, this is something I really think that every woman in the childbearing, of childbearing age should know the basics about how birth works and what to do if you do have a baby on your own, because it could happen to anyone. I mean, how many stories have we heard about babies born in the car, or they're born at home, like precipitously? A precipitous labor just means like really fast, way faster than expected. So one minute the mom's just kind of bouncing on her birth ball, the next minute the baby's crowning. It does happen. It could happen to anyone. Inclement weather, you could be stuck at home. Just traffic where you can't get to the hospital. It just could happen to anyone. And what are you going to do in that situation? Obviously, we hear these stories, and isn't it funny how the baby's always fine? Like, oh, the baby just came out. Babies are just born when they need to be born. So everything will be fine. But I would think that it would be a lot nicer to be calm and, knowledgeable in that situation. Like, okay, this is happening. This wasn't my plan. I planned on going to the hospital, or I planned on my midwife making it on time, but that's clearly not going to happen, and I know what to do. So that book, Home Birth on Your Own Terms, it's going to go over every single scenario. Like, what if this happens? What if there's bleeding? What if there's a shoulder dystocia? What if? It's going to cover everything you would need to know. So you could even keep it as a resource. The next question is about oral ties. So like tongue tie, lip tie, there are all kinds of oral ties. So in one of my previous lives, I did do lactation consulting. I've done so many different things before I figured out that I can't leave my home because I have all these children, and trying to do a job outside of the home is counterproductive. Like children, homestead, animals, and then trying to leave the home, not happening. But anyway, I did do that. And this is the thing right now. This is the go-to, almost like the scapegoat when a baby is struggling to nurse, or when the mother perceives that the baby is struggling to nurse. We jump to, oh, they have oral ties. We go to a pediatric dentist or whoever, and they clip the ties. And actually, I just think that it's overdiagnosed. I think it's so overdiagnosed. And a lot of times, some mothers do report that, like, oh, as soon as, we got the revision, everything was fine. The baby latched on a whole lot better and was able to nurse better. And some moms report no change at all, or that it gets worse. So I don't know. I have my last 3 babies have had, like, it's very tight up here on the top lip. So that might be diagnosed as a tie if I took them to somebody. And I do know how to diagnose these things. That people have asked me to check their babies before, brought their babies over, but I'm almost always able to fix the problem without any kind of surgery. So what I do is, as far as, lip and tongue ties, is I just manipulate the baby at the breast. What I mean by that is, when a baby latches, you need a good wide latch. And the thought is that a tie prevents the baby from, it restricts motion in the tongue or in the lips and in the jaw, so the baby can't open wide enough, the baby can't latch on well. But all of this is stretchy tissue, right? It's all flexible, it's all stretchy, and it can be manipulated. So what I do is I latch the baby on, and while the baby is latched on, I take my finger and go around and pull down on the skin here, on the chin below the bottom lip, and then do it above the top lip too, until I get their lips stretched out in like fish lips around the breast. And I do that every time they latch until it's not a problem anymore, because they learn to open their mouth wider and that tissue stretches out. I've just had great success with this, and I've taught moms how to do this, and they've had great success with this. So that's my basic answer to, dealing with oral ties without surgery. If you think it's severe, then yeah, just go see a specialist and follow your gut. At the end of the day, if you feel like getting it revised is going to make a difference, or maybe you're just at your wit's end, then try it and see what happens. Next question is, do I do anything to prepare my older kids for the baby, prepare for that adjustment? I really don't do anything to prepare them. I never have. I've never gotten any special books or any classes or anything like that, you know, and I've never had a jealousy issue. All of my kids have always taken great to the baby. And I think that the biggest thing that I've done is I'm just close to all of my kids all the time. I make sure, you know, physical touch is important, like giving them lots of kisses and hugs all day. And when I'm pregnant, even though I know sometimes you don't feel like that, maybe you feel touched out or whatever, like stay close to your kids. Don't ever let them sense that the pregnancy is keeping you from cuddling them or kissing them or hugging them. And, you know, I take their hand and put it on my belly and say, you feel the baby? Like I let them always feel the baby. We always talk about the baby in my belly. And when the baby arrives, they are welcome. I encourage them to be close to the baby from day one. So there's no like restricted access to the baby. Like you can't touch the baby. You can't get near the baby. It's not like that. I mean, I've actually had people come over and they kind of freak out at how much I let my kids handle a new baby. But it's just, it works and they love the baby. So obviously I'm supervising, especially if it's like a toddler with a new baby, you do need to supervise a little bit, but just encourage them to be gentle, be easy, come give the baby a kiss, hug the baby, and let them know that they're still loved. So this is a part of our family now, and you're still a part of our family, and we're all a family together. So that's all I've done. Nothing too special there. The next question is about breast milk storage. Do I store breast milk in the freezer? I have before, but this time I'm not. I don't have any in the freezer. With my first 3 babies, I had to go back to work right away. My first 2, I was actually still in college, so I had to get back to class and back to work. So I had to pump. I had to have a freezer stash. And then my third, when I had to go back to work, had to do that as well. And I hated that. That was just the worst. But I did always have a freezer stash. And you know, at that point in my life, I was in my 20s when I had my first 3, and my husband and I still were trying to walk that line of, I think a lot of people do this, like still having a social life, basically having our social life be unaffected, but also still have kids, which is stupid. It's ridiculous. So I always had milk in the freezer in case John and I wanted to go out. And we don't really do that anymore. If we go out, we go out with our kids. Yes, sometimes we might go out on a date night, but the new baby is going to come with me. We've just given up on that. I think that's kind of like an American phenomenon, like extended adolescence. So basically, you are in your 20s or 30s, you get married, you have children, but you still feel like you should be able to go out and party and stuff all the time too. We definitely did. We did that, and it was stupid. We don't, so that's not a motivation for me anymore. Like, I need to be able to leave and get my time away from the baby. No, I don't. The baby needs me more than I would want to do anything like that. So I just don't really have a reason to have a freezer stash anymore. If something happened to me, like I got really sick or something, my sister would have to step up and pump for the baby and help nurse the baby. And I know she would. And I would do the same for her. That is the beauty of having either a friend or friends or a sister, cousins, whoever, who share the same, I don't know, beliefs and lifestyle and values is, you would help each other out in that type of situation. All right, the next question is, how do I get through the day having lots of children without feeling exhausted and losing my patience? Well, sometimes I am exhausted and sometimes I lose my patience. I just don't film it. I don't record it because that wouldn't be proper or fair to my family or to anyone. Because we're not supposed to air dirty laundry. I know that's become popular and people say, oh, I'm just being vulnerable. No, you're not. You're showing parts of your, like chapters of your life that are not meant to be read out loud. That's what you're doing. So I don't think that we should be that transparent every little time we maybe are not at our best. I just don't feel like I owe that to anyone. That's a private moment where I maybe lost my patience and then I have to go and repent and apologize to my children and my husband. I don't have to share that with people. So I'm a normal person. I lose my patience and I feel exhausted sometimes. Now, if that's your norm, like your default mode is you're constantly exhausted and constantly, just snapping, that's not normal. And there are probably, physical aspects contributing to that, environmental and spiritual. And mind over matter. Getting yourself in a good place spiritually can help you overcome a lot of the physical stuff. I'm not saying all of it, but it can help overcome a lot of the physical stuff. So that would be my biggest tip. And I feel like I'm in a great place now. I get more patient the older I get. It's almost like, you know, you look at parents compared to grandparents. And what do grandparents always say? Like, oh, I have so much more patience now. Or adult children say that about their own parents. They're like, you're so much more patient with my kids than you were with me. That happens with age, or it should happen if you're maturing and growing in wisdom. And that's true in motherhood too. You're going, if you are working on yourself spiritually and taking care of yourself, you're going to be a better mom in your 30s than you were in your 20s, or in your 40s than in your 30s. You're going to have a little more wisdom, a little more experience, more patience, and more perspective. Perspective really helps, you know. In the early years, when I had them back to back, like 1, 2, 3, I'm young, I'm working this job, and you feel like this is just never going to end on one hand. And then on the other hand, you're like, but wait, I don't want it to end. I want these kids. I want more kids. And reconciling those two is really, really difficult. So that's just part of the early years of motherhood in our society, because in our society, most women are working outside of the home while also trying to have these kids and have a family, and that's just unrealistic. So know that evaluate your situation. If you're constantly exhausted and losing your patience, is it because you're overworked? You're working an outside of the home job, and then you're trying to be like, you know, homemaker and mom and wife too, because that's too much. There's a reason that the church speaks out against mothers working outside of the home. It's not to hold women back or hold women down. If you actually read the Vatican documents on why women should not work, or wives, sorry, not women, but wives and mothers should not work outside of the home, it's for their own good, for their own protection, because it's, you know, when a woman is overworked like that and overburdened, her health suffers, her spirituality suffers, the children suffer, the home suffers. So it's really for our own good that we should not be trying to do two different vocations at once, like wife and mother and trying to have this career. So take that into consideration. I mean, when I was doing both of those things, I was frequently just kind of having little nervous breakdowns. Not really like nervous breakdowns, but just like on the verge of tears at a certain point every day, and so exhausted. So looking back in hindsight, I can see why. But that's not to say that just being a stay-at-home mom is going to fix all your problems. If you are in poor health physically or spiritually, or if you just don't have any help, you're isolated, you don't have a support system, then it's going to be harder. And recognize that, do what you can to control that. And then the rest of it, you've just got to let go and pray, because there's only so much we can do. There's usually not a lot we can do if we don't have an adequate support system. Like we don't have grandparents to lean on or anything like that. A lot of you asked where I get the dresses that I wear, and I always link them. They're linked in every video, but they are from Neuflora. Most of my dresses are from Neuflora. I've been shopping with them for a couple of years now, and it's a Christian-owned company. I really love all their clothing. They release a monthly, like, curated capsule wardrobe, so it's all very cohesive, soft, natural colors, which with my skin tone, that's what I like to wear. And I love their selection of smocked dresses. These are the best for all seasons of motherhood. So I can wear this same dress, and I did wear these same dresses whether I'm 9 months pregnant or postpartum or not pregnant at all. So they're great for breastfeeding. I just have this pulled down. I'm actually nursing right now, and they also allow lots of room for the belly to expand. So I actually nursed my toddler until I was 34 weeks with this baby. So I was big pregnant and nursing, and these dresses were perfect. So I'll link them again in the description for you guys. How to prepare mentally for labor. Well, I think one of the best things that you can do is just expose yourself to what undisturbed birth looks like. And there are so many resources out there these days, so many birth videos, I mean books, podcasts where ladies share their birth stories. So just immerse yourself in that so that it becomes normal to you. Like this becomes not surprising at all for you just to watch a video of a woman by herself having a baby in her bathtub or in her bed. Like, oh yeah, I've seen, this is like the 100th video like that I've watched. It just happens. So normalize that process for yourself so that it's just not shocking or scary for you to see that. The next thing I would say is learn physiologically what is happening inside of your body, both hormonally, chemically, and actually like anatomically during labor and birth. And remind yourself of that when you're giving birth. So I know that the uterus has different layers of muscle and they all contract in different directions during a contraction. And I know that if I tense up, I'm working against that process and I'm gonna make it worse. So knowing how the body functions in that way helps me, I'm not gonna forget. Like, I'm just not gonna forget and accidentally tense up, because I know for a fact that is gonna make it worse. So educate yourself. The more you know about how your body works, the better you will do. The next thing would be to, in the weeks and months leading up to your labor, eliminate as much stress as possible. This is not the time to be taking on new projects, like new big stressful projects, unless it's something fun, like with nesting or a fun little creative thing. But nothing that's gonna really be keeping you up at night, preventing you from resting, or just preventing you from really preparing mentally, thinking about your baby and getting excited about your baby. So avoid stuff like that. And then obviously, spiritually, be praying over your birth experience. I am not about manifesting at all. It is a bunch of like crock, because it's so funny to me, like all the people who tout manifest, oh, I'm going to manifest this kind of birth. You know what? I've just listened to thousands and thousands of birth stories and seen births. About 50% of the time, not even 50, let's break it down into 3. Like 30% of the time, it goes like they wanted. 30% of the time, it's different than they wanted. And like 30% of the time, it's bad. And it's like nothing at all. And they all reconcile that the same way by, the ones who it went well say, oh, that's because I manifested this. That's why it went well and went the way I wanted to. And then the other ones are like, oh, well, the universe just had something to teach me. And so thankfully I manifested this, because then now I've been taught a lesson by the universe. Just no, your birth is going to be what it's going to be. And you don't know, you don't know what it's going to be. You don't know how long that your labor is going to last. You don't know exactly what position you're going to feel like being in at every moment of the birth. You don't know if you're going to want to read those affirmation cards you printed out or not. You don't know. There's nothing wrong with having an idea of how you want it to look and being prepared and having options. Like maybe you have a music playlist and it's there and ready in case you want to listen to it. Maybe you have a birth tub that's there and ready in case you want it. But when you get your mind so set on exactly how your birth you want it to look, and it doesn't go your way, I've seen women actually describe that as a traumatizing experience. And a lot of that comes from the pain-free birth movement. I'm not like naming any person, it's just like a movement. Women just kind of get stuck on this idea of pain-free birth. And it's almost like a prosperity gospel, like a name it and claim it, right? They name their pain-free birth and say, I'm gonna have a pain-free birth. I'm gonna have a pain-free birth. And they do all the things that these ladies say. They make the affirmation cards. They listen to the stories. They prepare with breathing and meditation and prayer or whatever. They do the birth tub. And guess what? It's terribly painful for them. Just because that's what that birth was going to be for them and that's what it was always going to be for them. It's not their fault. You can't 100% of the time manifest a pain-free birth. I've had a pain-free birth, but it wasn't anything I did. That baby it just happened. It was an easy birth. It just happened. So don't do that. Don't be very super rigid in your expectations for your birth. Just go into it. And what I like to say is Lord, let your will be done. Whatever you have for me, give me the strength, the endurance, the patience to endure this. And if it's pain-free, great. If it's quick, great. If it's long, give me endurance. Lord, just help me through this birth, because I know whatever it is what this baby needs to be born. And it's what I need. It's a sanctifying experience. We don't like that verse in the Bible when we read that verse that says that women will be saved through childbearing. Well, it doesn't mean that we're replacing the work Jesus did on the cross. That's not what that's saying. It's saying that is part of our sanctification. I mean, going through such a challenging thing to bring a new life into this world, a new life that you are going to nourish at your breast and give your entire self to for the rest of their life and your life, that's a huge sacrifice. That is a part of a wife's job of picking her cross up and following Jesus. So it's part of our sanctification. Sometimes it can be easy, sometimes it can be really hard. So just pray that the Lord would accompany you through that process. That is my advice on mental preparation for birth. Now, I've talked a little bit about putting baby on their belly to sleep. That is something that I do. And I'll show you before I end the video. I don't want to do it now because I might wake him up, but I'll show you how I do it. And I've gotten a lot of questions about that. Now, I need to go into depth on this because I briefly touched on that in the concern with sudden infant death syndrome from belly sleeping. And I mentioned that there's a correlation between vaccines and SIDS, and there is. I forget the exact statistic, but maybe like 79% of babies who pass away from SIDS had at least one vaccine within the last 24 hours. So there's a huge correlation. Now, I'm not saying that an unvaccinated child has never died and it was unknown causes, because that has happened, but the frequency with which that has happened has just skyrocketed since we started vaccinating babies. So there's a huge correlation there, but there can be other reasons. And, you know, in more recent research, we're starting to see that possibly there could be a genetic predisposition for sudden infant death syndrome. So these babies might be the ones who, you know, maybe stillborn babies had something genetically to where if they would have been born, you know, maybe like if the mom would have been induced and they were born a week earlier, that baby actually would have passed away anyway because there was something wrong with that baby. But what that means is if that baby's already predisposed to be more vulnerable, to not waking, what it is it's that they're not going to wake up when they get into a really deep sleep, then we definitely don't want to go pile a bunch of toxic vaccines onto that baby and burden that baby's system. Belly sleeping alone does not increase the risk for sudden infant death. In fact, there are just as many sudden infant deaths with babies who are sleeping in a crib by themselves, swaddled on their back. I'll have to look for the exact statistic there. I've looked at so many numbers, it's hard to remember like when and where I've seen everything. In fact, when a baby is on their back, there's actually a much greater aspiration risk, which just means that they could spit up and choke. Especially, you know, a baby, when they first learn to roll over, they usually learn to roll over from their stomach. If they're on their stomach, they can actually get up on their side and even start to roll a little bit. But when they're on their back, and they're really little, that's almost impossible for them to roll over. And if they're swaddled and immobilized, then that's an even greater aspiration risk, which I'm not a fan of swaddling either. I don't swaddle my babies. When you swaddle them, you're inhibiting their reflexes. And that's one of the ways that they actually wake themselves up out of a deep sleep, which a lot of this just doesn't apply to me because I don't let my babies sleep alone. They sleep with me. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But if your baby you've made the decision for your baby to sleep alone in a crib or in whatever, and you've got them on their back and you've got them swaddled, well, when they're swaddled, that takes away their ability to elicit that startle reflex. You know that it's called the Moro reflex, the startle reflex, like when you're going to lay a baby down on their back and they startle like that. That's one reason why babies don't sleep well on their back, is because anytime they're on their back, they startle really easily. They can't get into a deep sleep because they don't feel secure. They almost feel like they're falling. And that's also why new babies don't really like to be breastfed in the cradle position on their back, is because they're trying to nurse and swallow and breathe, and they're eliciting that startle reflex. So belly to belly nursing is better. Gosh, we could just like go into so many side tangents here. We're talking about belly sleeping right now. So I do belly sleeping for naps during the day, just like you see. I did have to lay the baby down because my little guy crawled up here on the bed. So he's on his belly. He's on my bed now, but I've got a little cradle over here in my room too. So if I'm making my bed or something, I'll just lay him in the cradle. And my room is very well lit. It's right off the kitchen, so I can look right in here and see him sleeping on his belly. even though I'm not worried about belly sleeping, I just personally don't like leaving a new baby to sleep alone out of my sight. It's unnatural, it's uncomfortable to me, and to me that's one of the best tools that God has given us to take care of our babies is just our emotions. Like, women are actually supposed to be more empathetic and emotional because it's a protective mechanism for our baby. So if I'm uncomfortable with something for my baby, that means it's probably a risk to my baby. So I just need to listen to my gut on that. So I always, when I have a tiny little baby like under 3 months napping or sleeping not on me, then they're within, like, I can hear them or see them or both. Now at nighttime, let's go into co-sleeping, bed sharing. At nighttime, I don't let babies sleep alone. Sometimes we'll start out the night with baby in the cradle if I want to like lay by my husband or something, and yeah, we'll just start out the night with baby in the cradle, but when it's time for me to shut my eyes and go to sleep, I bring baby to bed with me, and no, hun, too much. Let him sleep. I bring baby to bed with me because I can't sleep without him, and I don't want to sleep without the baby right next to me. Sleeping with a baby right next to you is the best thing for the mother and for the baby for many reasons. There is a book called Sleeping with Your Baby by Dr. James McKenna, and he runs the Mother-Baby Sleep Lab at Notre Dame University, where they actually observe mothers and babies and sleeping and they observe for behavior and safety, and they'll even have them hooked up to where they're monitoring their vital signs as they're sleeping to watch for patterns, and they've established that this is the best way for babies and mothers to sleep. This is the biologically normal way, is for mothers and babies to sleep together. They've observed that mothers will care for their babies without waking up, and I've seen that in my own life and in lactation consulting from talking to different women. You know, the mother like changed a couple diapers overnight and nursed a few times and doesn't even really remember it. So check out that book if you still think that, like, we're in 2024. I think a lot of this is being exposed, but there are still doctors out there scaring moms, saying that you're going to kill your baby if you sleep in bed with them. So just check that book out if you have safety questions and concerns. Now, are there instances in which a baby is smothered in bed with a parent? Yes, but there's a reason for this, and it's because co-sleeping is being done in an unsafe manner. So there are risk factors and contraindications for co-sleeping, or bed sharing, I should say. Morbid obesity is one. So if you're morbidly obese, your reflexes aren't going to be the same. A lot of that's due to sleep apnea. A lot of it's due to body composition, so that's a contraindication. Another one would be smokers. That's a contraindication because you're breathing onto baby at night. Also, if you're a drinker, if you take certain medications that would cause you to not have the same responsiveness at night, if you have like a waterbed, there's just stuff like that. There are. And if you read that book that I recommended, How to Sleep with Your Baby, it has a whole list of people who should not sleep in bed with their baby. Like, don't do it because you've got something going on that makes it unsafe. Another thing is that dads don't have the same level of responsiveness as moms do. So this isn't something like, oh, I'll sleep with the baby tonight and my husband will tomorrow. No, this is the mother's job. Oh, another contraindication is actually formula feeding. If the mother is not breastfeeding, then, and this has just been observed like in the sleep lab, and you know, that's just how it is, the responsiveness is not going to be there as it would with a baby who's breastfeeding. So dad should not be sleeping with a new baby. This is something for mom, and you shouldn't put the baby in the middle of the bed in between the mom and the dad, because the dad could and might roll over onto the baby and is, like I said, just not going to have that same responsiveness there to wake up and be aware of that. As far as being worried about baby rolling off the bed, if you sleep with the baby like on the edge of the bed, I would just recommend like cradle sleeping. It's like the like cuddle curl, and it just feels weird for me to like lay down and show you guys this, but I guess I'll do it. I guess I will just show you. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. You just lay down. Gotta move all my pillows here. And the baby is here in your arm. And you've got the baby cradled, facing you. So the baby can latch on and nurse just like this. And here, you go this way.
and the baby will sleep like this, and you sleep like this, and then you switch to the other side. So the baby's not going to roll outside of your arm and roll off the bed. Okay, so that's one way to sleep with your baby is like the cuddle curl, where they're right in your arm here. Another way is you can elevate yourself on a pillow and have baby sleep on your chest. So then you're going to be aware. Like, you just are. But you probably, if you're skeptical of this, you're not going to believe me no matter what I say. You're going to have to read the book and see the evidence for yourself as far as mother-baby awareness with sleep. Another question I got a lot of is, do I cover when I'm nursing the baby out and about in public? Nursing in public sounds like some kind of crime, like indecent exposure or something. But do I cover? And you know, this is something I've changed my mind on, because when I was younger, I really was not religious at all, and I was so passionate about breastfeeding, and I just really kind of fell for the like normalized breastfeeding movement that said we should be, or, you know, take the stigma away by just openly breastfeeding. And I never like whipped my breast out and was like that, but I wasn't as aware as I am now of how pornographic our culture is. We live in such a pornographic culture. It's unreal. And I'm more aware of that now, so I do. I don't have a specific cover, just whatever little muslin blanket I have with me, I will just use that to cover. Now, if I'm wearing something like 2 shirts where I can pull the top shirt up and like the bottom one, a tank down, and nurse very discreetly like that, I will, depending on where we are. But I don't know, I'm almost just more comfortable just covering or going and sitting somewhere privately. Like I said, the older I get, I'm just more aware of how big of a problem, like how sexualized many people's minds are. And whereas I know that breastfeeding is very natural, it needs to be done, it's not anything shameful, and I certainly don't sexualize it, I can't help that other people do. And I don't want myself and my baby to be the object of somebody else's sexualization. So for that reason I do. And, you know, my husband's never said anything about it, because like I said, I've never just been overtly just like getting my breast out and nursing my baby. I've always been discreet about it, so he's never said anything, but I think it's a respectful thing to do in today's culture. Next question is, did I ever feel scared or worried when things were different with this last baby? So if you watched my birth video, you'll know that it was a really long labor for me personally. And there were just some things that were just different about this birth. And no, I never felt scared or worried at all. And part of that is because I know where my lines are. Like, I know in the event of X, Y, or Z happening, I would transfer to a hospital, or I would have to get more assistance. And so I'm just not worried about that, because if that happened, that's just what I would do. But I would just do that, and then I would go along with that, and I would know in my mind, this is, you know, this is the best place for me right now. The hospital is the best place for me right now because X, Y, or Z happened, and I know I needed to go here, so I just wouldn't be worried about it. I mean, anything can happen, but I just kind of look at it like being scared and worrying isn't helpful, so it's not on my list of options of things to do. So no, I wasn't worried. I wasn't scared. I was tired. I was hurting, and I was thinking. I always think a lot when I'm giving birth, so I was just thinking like, wow, I see why women beg for medication and just beg to be put out of their misery. It's not uncommon. Women say crazy things when they're giving birth. Like, women who are totally mentally stable, not suicidal or anything, will say like, please shoot me, or yeah, put me out of my misery. That's really common for women to say those things, because that's just the level that the pain can reach. And so that's something, if you're ever going to be a birth worker, you have to know that women sometimes say those things. And usually what that means is they're just really close to having the baby. They're kind of getting into transition. So I just remember thinking that, like, wow, I just so sympathize with the women who lose it, because if I was going to lose it, it would be right now. Like, it's hurting so bad, but it is what it is. I just kind of kept, I don't know, you just keep going. Like, and like I said earlier, as far as the mental preparation, I just kept thinking back to like, I know what my body is doing on the inside, and I would just visualize that and be like, okay, this is why it's hurting, because my body's working in this way, and it's going to be just fine. All right, we've talked a little bit about vaccines. I've got a lot of vaccine questions, and I'm just not going to do like a whole series covering every vaccine because it's been done. I do not vaccinate my kids at all. No vaccines, no knives, and no needles. No circumcision, no vaccination, no knives, no needles. It's not necessary, and it's harmful. Both of those are harmful things. If you're Jewish, that might be like a religious practice you do, circumcision, but it's not a Christian practice. Read the New Testament over and over. Again, it says in the New Covenant, we don't do circumcision anymore. We don't do that. The circumcision is spiritual now. It's cutting away the sinfulness and attachment to the world in the heart, not in the skin. So you can read that for yourselves. It's not a Christian practice. Many Christians do it, but they are just doing it for cosmetic reasons because they want their baby's penis to look like the husband's penis, which is strange. Like, it's declining. There are a lot less people who are circumcising now. It got really popularized. I don't even know if I want to go into this. Let me just share a resource. Go into the description, hit the more button, and I'll share a resource on circumcision and you can check it out. But I don't do that. I don't do vaccines. I'll share resources on vaccines as well. This is talked about a lot now. It's once again, it surprises me when I hear people who do vaccinate, because it's just, I'm like, oh, people still do that? People are still vaccinating? We've just learned so much about how harmful they are, and how corrupt the industry is in the past 5 or 6 years. I just don't know a lot of people in my personal life who still do that. So Candace Owens has her Shot in the Dark series. Check that out. There are a lot of good books. My favorite book to start with is called Dissolving Illusions. It goes through the history of vaccines and infectious disease. It's a great book. There's just so many resources, so I'll link some of those for you guys. And it's worth mentioning, I've mentioned it before, but I'll mention it again, that I actually used to be very pro-vaccine. That's what I learned in nursing school, is that vaccines are good. They save lives. You're an idiot if you don't vaccinate. Your child's gonna die. Another word for an unvaccinated child is a dead child. Like, these are things that they taught us, and I believed that. And so actually with my oldest children, I did get them vaccinated on schedule. I followed all of the doctor's orders. I did it all until I didn't anymore. And I didn't anymore because one of my children had a seizure the night after vaccinations. And let me just tell the story really quickly. So I sat up in bed one night and there wasn't any noise. The house was quiet. But I had a really bad feeling that something was wrong with my baby at the time. And he was close to being a year old. So I had just moved him into the crib with one of the toddlers. And so I just ran into the bedroom, his bedroom, and turned the light on. And he was laying there blue and shaking and unresponsive. And so obviously I freaked out and picked him up and was screaming his name. And after a little bit, he came to, and we rushed to the hospital. And this was actually, this was the hospital I worked at the time. So I knew everybody there. And we were totally dismissed. And when we left, they printed off my little report sheet to give to me and my discharge paperwork. And they put that I brought him in for a fever. They didn't put that he had a seizure, and that I said, well, we just had vaccines today. Could that have anything to do with it? Like, no, that wouldn't cause it. That wouldn't have that's not connected at all. Well, they didn't even document the seizure. So much happened there. And I kind of pushed back on that, and they pushed back at me, and they're like, well, you don't need to bring your baby to the emergency room for a fever. I'm like, but I didn't. You're not hearing. What's going on here? I felt like it was a total conspiracy. Am I losing my mind? If it weren't for the fact that my husband was with me and saw all this go down, I might have actually thought I was losing my mind. But you know, my husband, who's not one to be crunchy or into conspiracies at all, he's just way too busy to even think about any of that. He was just astonished at what took place. And both of us were right then and there on the same page. Like, something is wrong here. Something is majorly wrong. And then I had to go and do all the research for myself on vaccines. I had to read all of the inserts. It was a long, laborious process, and it was so exhausting because I was scared. I still had that mindset like, well, I think the vaccine had something to do with it, but I can't just not vaccinate because then my kids will get sick and die. So I was, torn between those two spaces there. And my husband felt the same way, but I did all the research, came to the conclusion that my kids are not going to get sick and die if they don't get vaccinated. And we were both on the same page. So that was actually great to have his support there. All right, 2 more questions, then I'm going to wrap this up here. Do I use pacifiers? So very limited. I personally just use them like for a few reasons, and my babies have never really taken to them anyway. So I will use them very sparingly in the first few weeks after birth if baby is like, if my letdown is really strong, because that's when your milk is, you're engorged, right? Your milk's just come in and your letdown can be very powerful to where baby's kind of choking every time they latch on. And what happens is the baby gets frustrated and they neurologically will shut down. So it looks like they're going to sleep or they're just frantically kind of screaming, and it's because they're frustrated. And so just to get them to a place to where they're calmed down so we can try to latch again, I will pop the pacifier in, because sucking is actually one of the it's a reflex for a baby and it's calming for them. But if every time that they latch onto the breast and suck and nurse, they get gagged by your milk supply, that's not calming to them. So I'll use the pacifier like in between trying to latch, just to get them to be able to calm down. Now, if you have a really powerful letdown and baby's like gagging every time they latch on, it's okay. Don't quit breastfeeding. This passes after the first few weeks or so once your milk supply regulates. You just have to get through it. And one way you can get through that is by just press down. So once your letdown comes on, take your fingers, press down on the nipple. Count to 10 or 15 and the letdown will stop. Then get baby calm down and latch them on again, and it won't be as powerful. So that usually works like every time. So try that. And also, I mentioned this earlier, but don't nurse baby when they're in the cradle position, when they're laying on their back. Like I always think, like, how would you like that if you were trying to eat a big meal on your back like this? You wouldn't like that because gravity is working against you. So that's why you really, even now, I'm nursing right now. I have baby belly to belly. So see, like baby's belly is to my belly. You want the baby to be aligned, okay? So have them belly to belly with you to where they're not having to turn their neck to latch and nurse. And that really helps. So that was like a long-winded, we started by talking about pacifiers and ended up talking about alignment with latching a baby, but that's one reason I'll use pacifiers, to help get baby to calm down in those first few weeks if we have, trouble latching. Another time is just in the car. So that's just me. That's when I like to use a pacifier. Now, if you're not co-sleeping, you should use a pacifier. It can lower the risk of SIDS because the baby is eliciting that suck reflex, and they're a lot less likely to get into a really deep sleep and then not wake up from that. Obviously, the natural alternative to that would just be to have the baby in the bed with you, and that way they can latch on anytime that they want. All right, last question, and it's kind of a loaded question. It's, why do you think so many women choose to have C-sections? Well, a lot of women actually don't choose it. So I forget what the statistic was, but over 90% of women report going into the hospital wanting a vaginal birth. So a lot of women don't choose it. They want to have a vaginal birth, and then they end up with a C-section. There's a small percentage of women who do choose C-section, and there are different reasons why they would make that choice. Sometimes it is related to having a history of sexual abuse. That can be a reason. It could be a medical reason. There are some medical reasons. I won't go into that, but there are. Just know that there are some situations in which it is better to have a C-section. But they're very rare. They're very specific situations. So most women don't want to have a C-section. It's definitely not the easy way out because it's painful and it's like major abdominal surgery. I do think, however, that a lot of women say they want after the fact. Like, let's say they go into the hospital wanting a vaginal birth and it doesn't go the way that they planned and they end up with a C-section. They will just say, oh, I wanted a C-section, because they don't want to have to explain. There's like a feeling of failure there or something, or they don't want to explain why they ended up with a C-section. And so it's just easier to say like, oh yeah, I just scheduled it. Like, I didn't want to have a vaginal birth. I think that happens a lot. And you know, we need to reframe this whole discussion, because anytime this discussion is had vaginal birth versus C-section, there's all this talk about mom shaming. Like, that's ridiculous. That's infantile. Stop that. Let's reframe this and let's talk about, is it ethical to allow a low-risk mother to give birth in a hospital setting? That would solve a lot of our problems. It's not about shaming women, because when a woman is in a lot of pain, she's gonna say things she might not normally say, and she's gonna make decisions she might not normally make. You can't fault a woman for making, like, she's in a lot of pain and she doesn't have a lot of support. She's in the hospital and they're like, here, you want, and they're like, you know, got the epidural stuff right there. Like, you want us to take all your pain away? She's going to say yes. And then she's going to be at a lot higher risk for C-section because she's got the drugs now. So you can't fault her for that. Like, she was in pain and you put her on the spot and you didn't educate her or prepare her or support her. So let's stop that. It's not about shaming women. It's not about comparing this mom to that mom. It's about asking, should hospitals even be opening their doors to low-risk women? And my answer is no. And that is in other countries, that's the standard. You don't just get to go into a hospital just because you're giving birth. You have to be, it's like you have to be, you see a midwife, that's the standard. And then if something goes wrong and you become high risk, then they refer you to a specialist and then you can get that hospital level care. But that's going to be rare. And that's how we should treat it here. It's just like, you know, you can't just say like, oh, I want to go see a cardiologist because I'm not feeling well. You can't do that. What you do is you go see a general practitioner and they have to refer you to a cardiologist once they determine that, yes, there is actually a reason to suspect you might need that level of care. But I mean, just imagine what would happen if we started treating everyone who had a cold by putting them in the intensive care unit. Like, oh, you've got a fever and you're coughing, so you get an ICU bed. What? Like, we're going to be doing so much harm to these people, because then now we're subjecting them to this high level of care where they're getting all these invasive tests and procedures done that they don't actually need. So that's where the conversation needs to go, is in the United States, do we need to move toward a model where hospital care is not available to low-risk birthing mothers? And I say yes. We need to make midwifery care the standard for the low-risk population. And then you have your high-risk population who, you know who you are, if that's you. Maybe you have a congenital condition or something to where you do need that level of care. Let's reserve that for those mothers so that they are getting the level of care they need. So that's my little rant on C-section versus vaginal birth. Stop comparing women, because that's not productive, and then women just start henpecking at each other. And let's bring it to talking about, like, is this sustainable and ethical to do things the way we do with our model? All right, that's it for today. I think little man is tired of me talking. He wants me to get off here and pay attention to him, and I'm gonna do that. So thanks for watching this week. Next week, like I said, we will be back to homesteading and all the stuff like that. I'll link a lot of stuff in the description for you this week, so just tap that more button and scroll through my links if you have questions about anything I talked about today, or leave a question in the comments section and I will try to get to as many as I can.